Another day, another shitty representation of fencing. Alright, let's get into it.
再次挑战一下当然好，让我们观摩一下高水平的实战比赛，良性刺激一下。哎，你队长，队长，刚才冷子峰那小子在食堂撂下狠话，说要跟你决一死战。决一死战啊！练。
What's interesting here is that technically you can salute any way that you want. The only rule is that it has to be it has to look like it was done on purpose, and your mask has to be up, so you can't have something covering your face when you salute. Other than that, you could do pretty much whatever you want, but that's the first time I've seen a salute like that. I'm kind of curious if anyone, particularly in this country, actually does that in real life. I've never seen it before, but now I'm curious.
进攻，防守反击，2分。
Okay, so the subtitle said attack, defend, and counterattack. I mean, the term defend, they meant parry. So defend overall is just kind of a too broad of a term. The reason I'm bringing it up though is because even though this is probably like a mistranslation thing, I want to bring it up because it's kind of a common thing, is the term counterattack. A lot of people use counterattack to say after they've defended, then they move forward with their own attack and call that a counterattack. That's actually not considered a counterattack. It is just considered an attack. When an attack is parried, and the person who just parried goes forward, then that is not considered a counterattack, it is just considered their attack, because the first attack by their opponent ended at the parry. So they don't call it a counterattack. If it's an attack that directly preceded a parry, then it's known as a riposte. A counterattack is something else entirely. It's when one person will attack and then the other person, without parrying, without backing up, without basically doing anything to try to stop the attack or make it fall short, will instead go into it. And they will usually attempt to dodge. So, two attacks made at 100% going forward, like they're not trying to defend themselves in any way or make it fall short. If one is first and the other follows it, which is usually just a bad reflex, it's known as attack, second attack. A counterattack is different from just the second attack because usually the person is also trying to dodge in some way. And there are a lot of different ways of doing this, but that's what's known as a counterattack. It means you are attacking into it, and the only way that you're trying to make it your attack, instead of defending or backing up, you're trying to dodge in some way. So the only way that a counterattack can successfully work is if they do in fact miss. But if they hit, even by accident, then it's the person who attacked instead of the counterattack. This all has to do with the rules of priority, and I'm not really going to go into it. But what happened here, despite the wrong terms that were used, was a pretty simple action. I mean, the camera is moving back and forth, but from what I can see, the main character, the new fencer, is on the right. So I'm gonna, from now on, refer to them as fencer on the left and fencer on the right. So fencer on the right, the one who said death waltz for some reason, like he needs to say it before he goes forward every time. He goes forward, he goes off the line trying to take it. This is an uncommon but totally valid strategy. I have seen people, try to basically rush their opponent right off the line, and sometimes they even try to do it with a flunge, which is what this move is. He's calling it a death waltz. It's not. The closest thing it is a flunge. So basically he goes off the line first, he tries to take over the attack, and he gets parried and riposted on. So very simple action, and I actually like how simple it was because you have Fencer on the left who has a lot of experience and Fencer on the right who doesn't have a lot of experience. I don't care how much that Fencer on the right has done MMA or whatever it is. It's there are some advantages you can get from MMA, but not very many. Certainly not enough to overcome the 15-year experience difference between these two. But let's move on to the next touch. So that was another very simple move. And because it was simple, it was actually kind of realistic. The thing is, especially with how fast fencing has become, using really complex moves, especially in that short amount of space, is no longer really relevant. So having a more simple-minded perspective can actually aid you very well. It's before you get used to it, it's very easy to get caught up in all the different moves that you can do and trying to combine them to confuse your opponent. And then you go forward, you try to execute, and the opponent just comes forward with a very simple, I'm going to attack, and they don't have any other plan in mind, and they come out on top. It doesn't always happen. There certainly is a lot of strategy involved in fencing, but it doesn't really lay in how many movements you can get your blade to do within 1 second. But what happened here is basically the same thing. He comes forward, he decides to rush in the middle. The fencer on the left sees that he actually has taken over, which isn't really the kind of thing that someone who doesn't know how to fence wouldn't really be able to do. Because the thing is, most beginners are not efficient with their movements, and you can see it here. His footwork is very wide. He's bringing his back foot all the way forward to his front foot, which might seem like he's trying to put in a lot of speed, and if he doesn't know how to fence, that would be how he tries to do it. But fencers are taught to be very efficient with their movements, and there's more than one way to move quickly. So, for example, if he wanted to not push him off the line, but to actually attack in the middle and try to beat him off it, then I would actually recommend having his back foot land much sooner so that he can begin the attack a lot quicker, because the attack can only really be started when the back foot lands. So that's just an example of how smaller and more efficient footwork can help you, do things at the proper time, or even try to, start things sooner than your opponent. This is why I said before, it's not about speed, it's about timing. Someone with good timing will beat someone who has good speed. But in this case, Fencer on the left decided to back up because he realized he wasn't going, I guess he didn't want to challenge him in the middle. He backs up, he waits for him to attack, which is a good strategy. So he does his usual flunge thing, jumps up, goes forward, and then gets parry riposted. Now, it was a very nice movement. I will say that the actual parry placement wasn't bad for a parry 4, which is what he did, but he had to jump in order to make sure the parry 4 was in a better position to actually be successful, which is a bit of a waste of movement, I think. I think what would have been better if he didn't jump at all and just did a parry 5. Maybe that was off placement a little bit because the attack was coming at an odd angle. So, I don't think it'd be the most efficient thing to jump just to make sure that the parry 4 has a better chance of succeeding, but I can see how you might argue that. And, if you're athletic enough to be able to pull that off, then, I guess I can't say anything against it. It's not what I personally would have done, but I guess it works. And I'm saying that it probably would work if someone actually were to do this. Obviously everything is choreographed, both the actors know what's about to happen, but if this were in an actual environment where Fencer on the left doesn't know exactly what Fencer on the right is going to do, then this would be, if you can pull this off with a level of confidence that it's actually going to work because you've practiced, jumping and parrying often enough, which is uncommon, but it totally happens every now and then, there's no reason to not do it if you think that it will succeed. So, what happened there was, I guess, a more successful flunge. It's a little odd because he got parried 3 times, and the attack is technically over after the first one. It doesn't matter if he's still in the air, his attack gets parried, and because of that, his priority is gone. His attack is over. Not really a reason to have 3 parries in there, but they got something almost right. I can see where they were going with it. Was at the very end, Fencer on the right did one final attack. It was the 4th attack in there, so technically it's a remise. And a remise, for those who don't know, is just a continuation of an attack. You start your attack, you get parried, and for whatever reason, there are a multitude of reasons to decide to do it, but for whatever reason, you decide to keep going. Because, if you don't have priority, but you're the only one to hit, your opponent just totally misses you, then priority doesn't matter. All that matters is that you hit them and they did not hit you. Priority only really comes to account when you both hit each other at roughly the same time. But what happened in this case is he gets parried 3 times, so, 2 of them were remises, and then he goes for a 3rd remise. The thing that I liked about it was how Fencer on the left hit him on the arm. What I don't like is how he dodged. The whole, swinging towards the head and then ducking, that's something that you see in fake sword fighting. It doesn't really happen. The first reason is because if you are aiming for the head, then that usually means that you're coming down straight down to their head. You're not coming into the side because it's harder to aim and there's less of a safety net if you miss. Because if I'm going on a vertical line and I'm aiming towards the mask and my opponent decides to make me miss by ducking, all I have to do is just keep going downwards and I'll hit them. So attacking the mask at such a horizontal angle is not very realistic. And even if it did happen, it usually happens fast enough and lower enough that a duck like he did there would be too slow. He would have gotten hit anyways. So it would have been more realistic if he made him miss by backing up, by making his opponent fall short. That's a much more common method. So the dodge there was not realistic, but what he did after attacking the wrist, that was very well done. And it's something that you see all the time, because if your opponent missed, then especially if they just missed by you falling short, that means that their arm is out, and even though it's a small target, it is now very close to you. So a lot of fencers, if they just made someone fall short, then immediately after that they go forward. Maybe they do a small lunge, maybe sometimes they don't even have to do a small lunge, just an extension, and they will usually aim for the wrist or the arm, because that's the closest thing. And because they just missed, then usually the arm is at an angle that isn't very protected by the blade. The dodge was a little odd, but the follow-up was pretty well done. And then that right there was a feint, also known as a disengage. They mean the exact same thing. Fencer on the left comes forward, Fencer on the right realizes that he does not have the attack, so he slows down or even stops and just waits for a parry. Now, technically speaking, in Saber, you don't really want to stop when doing a parry. It just minimizes the chance that the parry will actually be effective. You want to combine your parries with footwork to make them more effective. The fact that he didn't, especially in the context of the show, can be chalked up to the fact that he doesn't have a whole lot of actual fencing experience. So I can let that one slide. But what he did there was he attacked into one line, into the 3, And then as his opponent committed to the parry, he quickly flicked around and went to the 4 line. So that kind of disengage, it's a little bit wide. It's a lot of distance to cover, and there are easier ways to set that kind of thing up, but it's also totally valid. Since I'm going pretty far into detail about what they're doing, then I don't feel bad about pointing out some smaller critiques. The fencer on the left's blade placement was a little bit weird, and what I mean by blade placement is not where it landed on the fencer on the right. What I mean is how he's actually holding it. It's a little bit difficult to tell, but it looks like the initial attack, the one that was meant to fool fencer on the right before doing the feint, it looked like it was oriented correctly, but then when he goes around to the side, he's now attacking with the back of the blade. Now the thing is, you can attack with any part of the saber blade, whether the side, the front, or the back of it, but it's usually recommended to attack with the front of the blade. And this is done for 2 reasons. First of all, the ref is supposed to be watching for what fencers are trying to do. And not just what they're trying to do, but what their intention is. So a lot of times, fencers train to cut with the front of the blade because it's easier for the ref to see where the blade is facing, because particularly in saber, there's a knuckle guard that is oriented with the front of the blade. So it's easier for the refs to see which way the blade is oriented. And if they see you cutting with the front of the blade, then that makes it easier for them to determine that you aren't just sticking your blade out and waving it around, but you are actually meaning to attack. And sometimes how the blade is oriented, whether it's pointing forward or pointing out to the side at the time a touch is made, then that can sometimes help determine whether the ref thinks that you meant to parry and then just accidentally brushed them on the way back, or you actually meant to attack, or, something like that. It can help a ref determine your intentions, which occasionally, depending on the circumstances, gets taken into account. So that being said, it is recommended to attack with the front of the blade, but is not strictly necessary. But honestly, I think the main reason why you wouldn't want to, especially attacking the 4 area, why you wouldn't want to do that with the back of the blade is just because it's uncomfortable. It means you're wrenching your wrist and then trying to go around, and it doesn't look very comfortable. So this is the kind of thing that they actually did a pretty realistic technique, but they had an actor who wasn't really familiar with the smaller details of fencing to pull it off and make it look like he actually knew what he was doing. So, good idea, kind of a poor execution. So that right there was actually a better example of the counterattack. It's a little bit difficult to tell because the way that they're, clashing blades and everything, that's not very realistic. So it's kind of hard to tell who actually has the attack. But at the very end, fencer on the right is coming in, but it looks like he's too slow. Fencer on the left decides, I'm faster, and this is an opportunity. So even though fencer on the right has already begun his attack, fencer on the left knows that he's able to take advantage of a small opening and goes for it. So the only reason it worked, especially since he didn't try to dodge or anything like that, making it a true counterattack, is he landed and then enough time passed by that fencer on the right's attack didn't even register. It's something called locking the opponent out, and it's totally valid. That is another example of a counterattack. Basically, fencer on the right attacks high, fencer on the left ducks and aims for the arm. This is another example of what I mentioned before, where it was a good idea, but it was a poor execution. The reason I say that is because fencer on the left is leaning way over, and his blade is kind of oriented a little bit off to the side. Basically, he's making it harder on himself to actually get full extension and make it comfortable. And if you stay upright and practice ducking with just your legs and maybe leaning forward a little bit, then that makes it a lot more comfortable and you're able to go lower. If you're doing it half with your legs and then half with your torso, like it looks like he's doing here, not only do you not go down as far, you are off balance. Yeah, it didn't look like a good duck, but the fact that he ducked and then went specifically for the arm, that is a good example of the kind of counterattack you might actually see in fencing, particularly in saber. But the thing is, even if he didn't duck, if he had backed up, that's also a very good counterattack. Basically, any sort of precision cut that is made to the arm after that attacking fencer has started their attack, that's a good example of the kind of target that saber fencers can aim for if they're trying to make sure that the initial attack does not arrive, but that theirs does. So basically, Fencer on the left is not doing very much parrying. Instead, he's relying on his athleticism, his quickness, his reflexes, and just his familiarity with his blade work to do a lot of counterattacks. So he's making his opponent miss in a multitude of ways and hitting him at very precise moments because he has better timing. So, he's taking these small openings and taking full advantage of them because he has the ability to do so. That kind of thing is very realistic. I've seen a lot of, very upstart, very energetic beginners who challenge much more experienced saber fencers because they just want to see what it's like. A lot of times, usually one of two things happens. Either the more experienced saber fencer takes it extremely easy on them and tries to, not just make sure that they have openings that the beginner is able to take advantage of, but make those openings so big that the beginner can see that they're there. Which, trust me, sitting at home watching this, you might be thinking, yeah, that sounds easy. Like, if my opponent is giving me an opening, why wouldn't I see it? But trust me, I've seen so many people, and half of them are, adults in their late 20s who just took up fencing. So, it's not like they're a little kid who doesn't know what's going on. They're fully functioning adults. They can see what's going on. They will still miss these very obvious openings. So that's when a more experienced fencer decides to really help their opponent. Sometimes, though, it won't happen. They'll decide to actually sort of, show them what it's like. And this will happen occasionally if, a coach wants the beginning fencer to sort of get a good glimpse of what they should be aiming for, of what can happen when you put in, a couple years of practice and serious dedication to the sport, what can happen when you get to that point. And so the more experienced fencer will actually, find these tiny openings in their opponent and just head in and do these things that when you see it for the first time, when you're the beginning fencer and you're seeing it for the first time, you're like, wait, how'd he do that? Didn't I hit him? I thought I hit him, but I didn't feel anything, but I didn't feel him hit me. It was so light, but, the light went on, so I guess he did. And they'll just do these things that are, so far beyond the beginner's comprehension that when, you first see it, you think, well, he's obviously cheating, but it's not. They're just they're taking the control that they have learned, and they're using it to exploit these tiny openings in their opponent's form and technique. That's pretty much exactly what's happening in this episode. And I have to say, it's a breath of fresh air from when the first time these two fenced. And that's just another example of what happened before. Again, it wasn't so well executed, but basically fencer on the right comes forward, fencer on the left backs up, and then kind of does a combination of a duck and does a counterattack. You can either fully commit to a duck or fully commit to going back. You can't really do two at the same time. It doesn't really work. But yeah, good idea, poor execution. That seems to be the theme of this bout. But it's better than not knowing how to fence at all. I mean, in terms of just what actually happened, the fencing terms is just attack, parry, riposte. But what it looked like was he binded his opponent's blade in a way. It wasn't a proper bind, but that's like the closest that I can think of how you would categorize that, and then push it forward. That's something that happens a lot in epee and sometimes in foil. It doesn't really happen a whole lot in saber, but I have seen it happen every now and then. It's usually by accident. So it's another one of those things where it's uncommon, but it's totally valid. So that was sort of a more in-depth look at the fencing bout that they just did, and then I guess, they reached the break and then they decided just to stop. But we're gonna keep going. This might be the end of the video, it might not be, because, I don't know if there's going to be more fencing, but I'm gonna keep watching and I'll let you know if there's more fencing in this. Okay, I was wrong. There isn't any more fencing in the episode. There was a scene with some drills and basic cutting exercises, but it was, like everything else in this show, overinflated and overexaggerated. So, in terms of the one bout we saw in here, well, half a bout because they stopped early, I actually liked it a lot more than they've done in past episodes. This was kind of the first time it made me think maybe they have an actual fencer on set, like sort of, making sure everything is accurate. So the only downside is they had the actors themselves trying out these things, and it was very apparent that they didn't have the kind of familiarity that, pretty much all other fencers would have. So I liked the actual actions that they were doing. I liked everything that was set up. On paper, it was all very well done. It just didn't look very good. It was, they didn't have very good form, and, it was clear they don't actually know how to fence. But the choreography was not bad. So I think this episode actually gets a higher score than the past ones. I'm going to give this episode an 8. I think they put a lot more thought and effort into making it a lot more realistic. So that's the end of that. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next week. Bye.